It is Friday, February 14th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Vincent Valentine episode of LTPS. We've got, yet again, another very busy week, so let's begin, as always, with a very brief reminder for the February lineup for PS Plus. Make sure you claim those games. Also, this coming Tuesday on the 18th, we have the PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup going live on PSN as well, which for PS Plus Extra, this is only 7 games total, which I think is the lowest amount we've had since the mid-2022 relaunch, but there is a pretty big title in there, that being Star Wars Jedi Survivor, so that's easily headlining the catalog this month. Then you've also got Lost Records Bloom and Rage, which is a day one launch going into PS Plus. We learned about that from the most recent State of Play, which we'll talk about in a second. There's also Saga Frontier Remastered. Somerville is really cool. I played that during 30 Platinums Part 3. It's a side-scroller, abstract kind of title, very similar to your Inside or Limbo, maybe Little Nightmares-esque, so definitely a very interesting title. No Platinum, obviously, but it's still a game that I would say is worth checking out. And then going into PS Plus Premium, we have Patapon 3, which we did catch wind of not too long ago, so we knew that was going in. And then Dropship United Peace Force for PS2, which never played that one. I do remember that was a title right before Sony made the formal recognition of London Studios, so it was an SCEE Camden game, I believe. But yeah, they're just pulling more games out of the backlog there, but not a whole lot going on for February, all things considered. But speaking of that State of Play, we can jump right to the PS Plus relevant announcements, because we did learn that there's going to be some more day one launches later this year. So the first one would be Blueprints. That's launching day one on Extra this spring, which it's being described as a genre-bending architectural adventure game. And then there's also Abiotic Factor launching day one this summer, which is a 6-player survival crafting game. So if any of those are your speed, you can at least expect that they're going to come with Extra on day one. And we also learned that the first 3 Armored Core games from the PS1 will launch soon on PS Plus Premium as well. Now, soon could mean next month. It could mean probably 2 months out. I would assume it's probably very soon, next month. But that's cool. I mean, Sony published the first one, but the series is kind of all over the place. I believe From does retain the full ownership of that IP, so I would actually propose the idea that now that Sony and Kadokawa have this very close joint strategic partnership, maybe Sony has that sort of blessing to go in the From Software back catalog for PS1, 2, and beyond, and we'll maybe see more of those games on PS Plus Premium, which I would love to see. Now, getting into our first news story, we of course have to mention the big 2025 PSN outage, which this was the longest time PSN has been down ever since 2011, where that was around 23, 24 something days, if my memory serves me correctly. So a high bar to beat, and one we don't want to beat, but in this case, PSN did go down around like 7 p.m., maybe a little bit before then, Eastern time on Friday. Did not go back up until 24 hours later, nearly 24 hours later, which by the time it did, Sony issued this statement saying that they have fully recovered from an operational issue, so that's what they're calling this, and they also gave a small goodwill gesture of extending PS Plus memberships by 5 days. So everyone's getting a 5-day extension, which means a 4-day net gain on the inconvenience, which I think is completely fair. We had a conversation like near the, like around the time the service was going back up, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably not going to do anything, but that's not entirely fair. You know, looking back, I think they have done PS Plus extensions in cases like this, and so every so often they will do goodwill gestures. So kind of forgot that, but in this case, I think it's fair. Them also saying operational issue, I think, is fair enough as well. There's been some dialogue around, you know, if Sony should be saying more, but it's like, what else are they really going to say if it's not something where it's sensitive, compromised data, if there's a network intrusion? If it's not that, then clearly there's really not much else to say. Operational issue. You want them to really outline some technical stuff that you're not going to understand. I don't really quite get that. But in this case, yeah, operational issue. I mean, they should have always been a bit more communicative as far as like addressing the issues, but it wasn't even not even nearly 24 hours. So I don't know. I think this was about as good as it could have been, given that it was definitely a big bummer. But having it back up is great, obviously. So in that case, PSN, yeah, it was, the thing is, it was operational too. Like for me, I could still log in, and that was the big tell-all of like, oh, well, it's just, you know, you could see that like certain aspects of the service are having a network traffic issue is kind of what I was gleaning from the whole thing. When you can't log into PSN and it's entirely down, like hard stop, that is where you would be more worried about a network intrusion. Now, something else we should also mention from the entire PSN downtime debacle is the disk drive attachment. Can you pair one to a PS5 during PSN downtime? So this post went viral on the Does It Play account, where one user tested this to see if their disk drive would pair during the outage, and they received a message saying that they could not do that, which the error code listed is also directly related to server maintenance, so it is very much a problem with PSN. But the weird thing here is that, like, I too wanted to test this because I am a part of that community. I think they do really important work. I always talk about the Does It Play website, where it's a great resource to see how many games are completely installable offline. It's, again, a really great resource and community that tracks the preservation of offline media and just that entire space, right? So I too wanted to try this. I did it 3 times. I did it 9 p.m. Right when the outage happened, 2 times during that case. It paired just fine. And then I did it on Saturday as well around, I don't know when it was, like, not in the morning, it was like 1 or 2 p.m., so it was getting closer to when the service was completely back up, but I did it like 3 times basically, and mine paired. The difference is, like, again, I could log into PSN, so there's really nothing I can, like, do at that point. I would have loved to have the service, like, completely locked out for me, because the console, mind you, can still connect online. It's just handshaking with PSN. We don't necessarily know if the console has to handshake with PSN, although in theory that clearly is what needs to happen to pair a drive to the console. It is still important, right? I mean, I know a lot of folks oftentimes get, like, really worked up about this in a way where they want to defend the online requirement, which is weird. Obviously, there's very few cases where you're going to be pairing a drive right in the middle of downtime, but it's just wondering what would happen and what does that mean for 10, 20, 30 years down the road for all these consoles that are going to be secondhand at that point, right? So that's the concern. There should be an end-of-life firmware update at the minimum that would address this, because the thing is, the disk drive attachment needing online, it is still a thing that is, I don't want to say requirement, but it's DRM. It's DRM that makes sense for Sony, because disk drive pairing, it's primarily encryption keys for the disk drive. The drive cannot mount games on its own without the keys, and the console has a unique ID that's part of the hash, so that's why it works the way that it does. But in theory, we would love to know that there is an end-of-life plan so that drives and consoles can be paired without an online requirement. If there is no server, that is going to be a problem, and it leads to a lot of e-waste. So that's the concern, and so in this case, we see that the mileage varies, but it would appear as though it could be problematic. All right, moving on to some news and rumors for some PlayStation Studio games, beginning with the ever-infallible Astro, because if you remember from the PlayStation Tournaments XP event in London, where they showed off that brand new speedrun level, well, that's now finally in the game, and there's more coming as well, confirmed on the PlayStation blog by Nicolas Duché. So we are getting 5 new levels in total, released on a weekly basis like they did before. So new bots to rescue, a new galaxy opening up in the base game, and there is also PS5 Pro support now as well, so getting a bump in resolution while maintaining 60 FPS. That is great to see there. And this news also came not right alongside, but we heard prior that it seems like Sony is looking to also do a PS5 Slim disc bundle with this game as well. Not as a disc, which is ironic, but it would be a download code. So an Astrobot PS5 disc bundle where you would get the base game and then the disc drive all for €4.75 to €4.99. This report comes from Bill Blakun writing for Deal Labs, which this bundle would come out on March 13th. Which that also lines up with the last day that the speedrun level would come out, the final speedrun level, I should say. So that's good too. I mean, the thing is, they were already leveraging the IP with a DualSense controller, so they very much wanted to invest in it well before the game came out at that point. But I would almost assume this bundle was something they were not going to do until they ended up seeing the critical reception for the game. So it's a very easy proposition for those that were maybe blindsided by all the Game of the Year awards and just say, oh yeah, hey, here's this this game and this console bundle. So it's all packed into one, and you can go check out what it's all about. So you all know where I stand here. The Astrobot supremacy has never been more alive. Loving the new content, so we will more than likely also do a speedrun upload at some point when all the content has dropped on PSN. Moving on to a new rumor for the God of War franchise, where if you remember from 2 weeks ago, we had one where the franchise might be going to Egypt for the new mythos that they're exploring. But now we're hearing maybe that's not the case and it's going to go back to Greece. So this comes from Tom Henderson speaking on the Insider Gaming podcast, where they were talking about the Egypt rumor. And he says he heard differently, that the franchise is going back to Greece and it's going to focus on a younger Kratos. Now, he did clarify he has no idea if it's a potential remake or if there's a remaster of the original trilogy, but he does say there's a chance it's a reboot or some kind of prequel. And he also is not convinced either. It's something he did not really look into. So we should really stress that this is nothing concrete. It's a very icy rumor at best, especially given Tom's one of the few that has often had very good sources close to SIE. So if he's not really looked into it, then it's just, something to bear in mind. But it's a fascinating prospect. I'm not so sure that's something people would want. It's weird watching the conversation around this one because, in a way, I think a lot of folks would love to see the first 3 games just playable on modern hardware, and that could be something as simple and basic as the games showing up on PS Plus Premium, which is still what I expect, although this is a franchise that is still so important that I could see it getting special treatment and maybe a team remastering the games and sprucing them up a bit more, kind of like a PS2 HD collection that we saw from PS3 and that being repackaged on PS4, PS5. I could see that. I could see them maybe going above and beyond and maybe trying to remake the first game or something, but doing like a new entry and it's a prequel and it's like another slot into the Greek universe and they've already done so much there and it's a young Kratos, that I'm not... I can't say I'm really sold on that. I very much would prefer like a sequel where it's exploring a new mythos and seeing where Atreus goes. I mean, I do want to see that stuff explored a bit further. So we're all in speculation territory, obviously, because the rumors are so icy as of right now. But that is something that was discussed recently, is the potential of maybe it going in that direction, which I would not prefer. I think I could safely say that. Moving on to another rumor, this one for Project Gummy Bears, where, again, that game was in incubation at Bungie for a little bit, then moved over to SIE under PlayStation Studios as a separate team. It's been described as the most fun project Bungie was working on at the time. It's a MOBA, very colorful, bright, lo-fi aesthetic. It might also have a knockout system similar to Smash Brothers. And so anyway, we're hearing from Vandal with this new report that they have sources close to the Gummy Bears project claiming that the game is going to be revealed at the State of Play, which obviously did not happen, but they also mentioned the game is going to come out this year for PS5, PC, and Switch. Now, clearly the report fizzles out because one aspect is already wrong. But I do still find it very interesting because there's 2 angles that are plausible. Now, one, the game coming out this year, you would think that seems way too soon because the game was in incubation and just recently moved over as a separate team. They only moved over like 40 staff. Like, how could the game possibly come out this year? The thing is, that might actually be something that Sony wants to start doing with live service games, which is mitigating risk. So it would come out in, you would presume, a very early access type of setting where the game is very stripped down, bare bones. I mean, it does look like something, but it's the kind of network test Sony can put out and, build upon it over time with player feedback and start to get a real sort of fundamental idea of how the community would receive that game. It could be a direct result of, say, Concord, where instead of investing a AAA budget into a game that ends up completely falling on its face, take the approach that a lot of other games do, which is do this early access thing, which would be very new for Sony, mind you, since they don't often do that. They do like to put out very polished, finished products. So there's that. The Switch thing also, I would say, is plausible. I mean, it sounds like this game is meant to be a little bit more cutesy and maybe goofy to a degree, and we know Sony has been a little bit playful in this area, which is not doing just PC, but now also testing the waters of Switch with LEGO Horizon Adventures. So even though the report, at this point is not stacking up all that well reliably, those 2 parts actually, I think, are believable. If they end up happening, I don't know, but I guess with Gummy Bears, which is a team that's now separate from PlayStation, or rather from Bungie, rather, so it's under PS Studios, which means it now has this sort of separate moniker that is away from the initial announcement of Bungie remaining independent, still doing multi-platform games. So of course they want to bar an Xbox release, which is not all too surprising, but if that's how they want to approach it, then I could see it happening. So we'll keep following Gummy Bears and see what plays out, but that report does actually, I think, make a lot of sense. Now, something else that did not show up during the most recent State of Play is Death Stranding 2 on the beach, and that's because we're probably going to have to wait until March for more info, where it's now confirmed that Kojima Productions is going to hold a panel for the game at South by Southwest 2025. It'll take place March 9th, and that's in Austin, Texas, and that will be where we'll get more, the latest updates on the game is what they're saying. Probably going to be very similar to the special stage event they did at TGS, so showing a certain aspect of the game. Maybe that is where a new trailer will debut, or the release date as well, which we are probably going to get very soon. And the game was also recently rated in Brazil as well, so the ratings are starting to flood in. More info has already been dated, so I think we can safely say that we are going to see the game happen this year, because we'll also talk about that during the Sony financials portion. But yeah, DS2 on the beach is going to be at South by Southwest. Now, we also have another rumor about another Xbox Game Studios title coming to PS5 apparently very soon. This one being Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga. So over on Twitter, where people were speculating about the State of Play announcements, Jez Corden of Windows Central said Hellblade 2 time, maybe. And then Nate the Hate responded with soon, very soon. Nate's been very accurate, so maybe this game is going to be announced in the next month or so. It seems like this title probably will show up quickly as well. Yeah, I mean, it's, as we've said before, I'm not sure how newsworthy this stuff really is nowadays, because the big like Band-Aid pull will be Halo. The Halo Master Chief Collection, to me, is sort of like the point where it's like, yeah, they're full-blown third-party, or I don't know. We already know that, but I guess to me that would be the sort of, not even a point of no return, but like, it just seems like that's the one property that is like the sort of king here. Once we hit that, it's like, okay, now the Xbox stuff is just sort of, it's another Tuesday as far as press releases go, or rumors in this case. I will say there's been obviously a lot of joking going around of how Microsoft is publishing more games on PS5 than Sony is. Well, yeah, that's going to happen when you have more than 30 studios and you're basically a multi-platform publisher at that point, right? So I don't know. I mean, clearly it's always funny to sort of look at these things in that way, but in what circumstance is Sony going to be able to publish more games than 30-something studios that now have express intent to ship on everything imaginable? So yeah, I mean, that's sort of where we are nowadays. It's not... Eventually, it's going to be normalized. It's not news anymore. And, you know, I think the big talking point really is, what does Xbox hardware look like next gen or beyond that? That's really the big question I find. All right, getting into Sony's most recent State of Play presentation that took place this past Wednesday. It was over 40 minutes long, a very big show, a lot of announcements, a lot of trailers. You know, the thing is, they probably could call these things showcases when they're like this big, but I think they've sort of learned their lesson as far as, you know, how they name these things, because even State of Plays, it's always mixed to negative. Some valid criticisms, obviously. Others, they tend to be overblown, you know, where I stand on that whole conversation. But having said that, it was still a very big show. So there was a lot of major third-party announcements. That's things like Shinobi Art of Vengeance, which opened the show. That's coming out August 29th. Borderlands 4 is coming September 23rd with a special State of Play for the game this spring as well. During my reactions, I'd mentioned like, oh man, a publisher is finally talking about a game that's coming out this fall, completely forgetting that like, oh, it's Take-Two. So that's really more pertinent to GTA 6 and how they're planning to align those games. So that completely went over my head. But also Supermassive announced Directive 8020. That's a new sci-fi aliens-like entry in the Dark Pictures series. Onimusha Way of the Sword gameplay showed up. That looks really good. Of course, the MGS Delta trailer and the release date, which we also learned that the Snake vs. Monkey mode is only going to be for PS5 and PC, not Xbox, so they're getting Snake vs. Bomberman. can't say I'm too shocked about that. Tides of Annihilation. Now, this does appear to be the sleeper announcement. Looks really interesting. Also, we got some gameplay for that too the following day, which is insane, but that game seems to be further along and really came out of nowhere. And then Mind's Eye, we got gameplay for this. That's from the new studio formed by the former Grand Theft Auto producer Leslie Benzies, which ironically that title is maybe the sort of reverse sleeper hit where people are seeing more of it and they're kind of like, I don't know, I'm just not really feeling this, son. But we had that, and then more, PlayStation related. We did see for the China Hero Project game, Lost Soul Aside, confirmed for May 30th. So really great to see that game is coming relatively soon. It did seem like it was going to be ready within like the first half of this year. So great to see that. But the explanation I always give here is that me personally, I always enjoy looking at games, period. I just love games and I love this hobby. So these shows are almost always fine to good for me, but it really is true more than anything where like oftentimes you're looking for one or two things out of a 40+ minute show and all these trailers, and that's the one thing that's probably going to make you happy. For me, I very clearly got that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But another State of Play, which we've got that, but we've got the South by Southwest thing for DS2 coming up. We've probably got another State of Play in May, so it's just, a rolling basis here, but Sony will be doing some talking. It just takes time, as this entire generation has proven to us. So with all that in mind, let's move on to some more specific PS Studio announcements from the State of Play, that being Days Gone Remastered, which was rumored prior, so now it's confirmed. Over on the PS blog, we have some details about the game. It's coming out April 25th for PS5. It's got improved graphical fidelity, increased foliage draw distance, improved shadow and lighting. It's going to support Tempest 3D audio, DualSense, VR quality and performance mode options, and also PS5 Pro support. There's also new accessibility options. They look very similar to what we have in other recent PS Studio games. There's also a new Horde Assault Arcade Survival mode, and a permadeath mode, speedrun mode, and an enhanced photo mode as well. And there is going to be a $10 upgrade from PS4 to PS5. However, PlayStation Plus redemptions are not eligible this time around, so a pretty stark contrast from what we saw with Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, where they were honoring play-at-home redemptions, so not the case here. And then all the new enhancements and new modes and everything is going to be released on PC as well, but that's going to be packaged as the Broken Road DLC for $10 USD. And it does appear as though it's going to be digital only as well, so there might not be a disc print. I hope I'm wrong about that. But yes, this game is now official, and the reaction has been not surprising, but I guess it really depends where you look. A good portion is very much the whole, oh boy, another remaster thing. That's all this company can do. A lot of criticism. Some of it obviously fair, but it's as we've said before, we've been down this road. I find sometimes it can be very overblown when it's totally ignoring the 4-year output that we got initially on this console, where I think it was stronger launch aligned versus PlayStation 4. But every studio, both at Sony and outside of Sony, has dealt with longer dev cycles. COVID delayed a lot of stuff, and we're also in this environment where we have a lot of PC, a lot of cross-gen. So again, we've talked about that stuff so many times, but there's that reaction, which was absolutely going to happen. The other thing though is like, you look at like Days Gone fans and they're pretty excited about this. Like, honestly, they want a new game, and so they're pumped about this PS5 version and hoping maybe that means that they'll do something with the IP, do a sequel. But there's still so many fans that sort of overlook that the whole Days Gone 2 thing was internalized at Bend. They didn't want to do it. They pitched it internally. It never got to Sony. It was a Bend decision to not do more Days Gone, but that's where the other angle comes in of it was a Bend decision to do this game. That's what people still seem to overlook about the ports and remasters, and I'm not trying to defend it, but like, it's just a business thing. That's what we try to always objectively look at and analyze, and nowadays it's very commonplace for a lot of team members at a studio when they're ramping up on certain projects and you've got a handful of staff that are sitting around doing nothing. These are things for that team to do. It generates money for the team. It's just an important part of the process nowadays. So whether you like it or not, that seems to be what happened at Bend. But here's what I'm curious about, right? Because they were clearly doing this for a little bit of time, not that much time I would assume, but you had a number of staff doing this alongside this other, new IP that they were ramping up production on. We don't know how far along that game got, obviously, but that's canceled now, and this game's going to ship soon. So now you've got a lot of staff at Bend. They're up to like over 100 something people, 130, 140. I don't know. It's a lot of staff that is going to be sitting around doing nothing as they sort of figure out what their next thing is. So they might take on like some work from other studios. Maybe they will do another project from the ground up that is similar to a port or remaster. It's something to sort of air out now of like, they're going to have to be busy doing something if the studio's future is secured right now and that they're not going to be closed and they have a chance to do something new. So that's honestly my biggest curiosity out of this announcement is like, we knew it was coming, but once it's out the door, where do they go from here? Either way, at least we've got what will now probably be labeled the best way to play this game. Now, the other SI announcement from the State of Play was Saros, a brand new single-player IP from Housemarque coming next year to PS5, with gameplay coming later this year as well, because this was a cinematic trailer, which I'm never a huge fan of, but it is one of those things where if it's an IP or a studio you care about, then you're going to be excited. So that was me, because I am a big Housemarque fan going back to the PS3, PSN days. So this was definitely very fun to see, especially because I think many others were not expecting to see their new game what feels like this soon, but we did, and so we can talk more about this game because we got some extra details over on the PlayStation blog. So Housemarque does say it is still a gameplay first experience, but they did want to capitalize on Returnal and make Returnal its own thing where it stands on its own. So this is similar, but it is indeed a new IP. The story is about Arjun Devraj, played by Rahul Kohli, where he's a powerful Soltari enforcer who is looking for someone on the off-world planet Carcosa under an ominous eclipse. A key gameplay distinction between Saros and Returnal, though, is that permanent resources and progression is more prevalent here. So in this game, you will be able to choose permanent upgrades for your loadout and suit to come back stronger each run. So again, gameplay later this year, and the release is expected 2026. Now, I did just say the announcement feels too soon. I mean, I guess it's not. Returnal came out in 2021, new content a year later. It's not a huge team, but if they're going to take certain technologies and core elements into this game, then sure, I can see how the announcement did happen at the time that it did. But what's funny is that what I am sort of looking at immediately is the announcement, it being only cinematic, and the time away from when it's going to come out, which does appear to be at least over a year away. Returnal was a pretty tighter window, like 8 months or something from announced to release, but that was like alongside all the PS5 initial reveal stuff. But the point is, the thing about Returnal, which was so great, is that the studio that was relatively unknown to the masses, that was well known for doing these smaller downloadable titles, and they took their bullet hell arcade style gameplay experience into a bigger budget, also wove in a narrative, and that's what really caught people off guard with Returnal, and that's why I love the game so much, is that they were able to do all those things and they did it beautifully. But the point is, Returnal's, behind us. So now we have a lot more eyes on this game than Housemarque has probably ever had in the studio's history. So they probably want a very big window to communicate more about what this game is, and also get the messaging out there that, hey, if you tried Returnal, it will be a little bit more, I don't know if lenient is the right word here, but like the problem with Returnal, no doubt, and I can say this despite being as biased as I am with how much I love Returnal, the game can really beat you down, and it's not as obvious with the suit augments and the permanent resources. Returnal is the kind of game where, you really have to get the gameplay loop to sort of progress far enough, right? You can't brute force your way in the same manner of, let's say Hades. Hades is still very tough too, but Hades has the more traditional roguelike approach of you buy augments and upgrades in between runs, and that's permanent. Whereas Returnal, you have to reach a certain point in the run to get 6 or 7 sort of key items for your suit that kind of help the next run, but it's really there to just advance the environment. So there's like the ether resource that is permanent that just buys revives, or you can trade it for the in-game currency, which is run specific. So that's not really helping you for your next run in the same way that, again, Hades would do it. The big thing with Returnal was the weapon traits. You use a weapon, unlock a new trait, and that will really power up the arsenal to where no matter what gun you get, your next run you're going to feel a lot more powerful and dispatch enemies much more easily. That was really the key way that you progressed in Returnal. But you still had to, again, get the gameplay loop. Here it seems like they do want to maybe fashion it in a way where it's similar to Hades, where between runs you have a resource that you can spend, and that will be a more traditional suit augment of upgrading health, armor, your damage output, things like that, because I don't doubt that the game probably still will be very difficult. Now, if they add another difficulty setting or something, I don't really know, because there are always two camps for people with games like this, right? Which is, I don't like roguelikes. And so no matter what this game's going to be, you're out. And I understand that. The other angle is you either do like this genre, or you're open to it. You tried Returnal, and it just beat you down pretty damn good. So I would hope that maybe it is a bit similar to Hades, just in that if you want to try and brute force your way into it, where it's a lot more of a learning experience and you're able to get further just by sheer virtue of those permanent upgrades, then it sounds like that might be the road they're taking, and they'll have some time to communicate that, which is very exciting. So no doubt this really shot up my list as far as like what I'm excited for. I'm so pumped. It looks awesome just from a cinematic trailer, which doesn't tell us a whole lot. But when that eye opened and I saw the bullet hell coming in, and some recognized it even quicker, it's like, man, I love that, and I can't wait to see this game, or more of this game. Now, in somewhat related news here, we can also mention the XDEV leak that showcased some very early footage of what looked like a goopy monster climbing a tower. And so a lot of people are looking at that leak again, where we heard it was an XDEV game, a studio based in Europe, and that fits with the Housemarque profile. But apparently that's not the case, and actually that game was from Deviation, and it was Deviation's now canceled game. So this really kind of came out of nowhere, but over on Reset Era, on the PS Studios thread, Duskullum was talking about the game, and he was talking about the term he gave the game. He always calls it Project Ooze. I just call it the Goopy Monster game because I know that's not what it's called. And so he also said, like, yeah, that's not the code name. And so when the one user, Tamari, asked if the real project name was Draconis, he confirmed that it was, which we can finally pin down that this game was Deviation's title before SIE canceled it, because that game is listed on former Deviation staff's LinkedIn pages, where it was in development around the original announcement and then canceled in mid-2023. Then Deviation moved on to Project Phoenix for PC, and they presumably couldn't land a publisher and ran out of money, and that's, you know, how that whole thing played out. But yeah, that's apparently what's going on. So the weird thing is, we know that Jason Blundell left Deviation, and now there's a new team at SIE, and the running theory has always been whatever that first game was at Deviation, there might have been creative differences between Dave Anthony and Jason Blundell. Blundell either took the game or took the idea and concept, and he wanted to move that over to SIE, where he got backing there. And so, in a way, maybe whatever this thing is still alive in some, like, to some degree, or it could be something entirely different, and maybe that was the game they wanted to do at, well, let's say Dave Anthony, for example, and that's where Sony bailed out of funding, and whatever Jason wanted to do, he brought that over. It's, you know, this is pure speculation, because we just don't really have a whole lot to go on that's super concrete. But I just wanted to at least update those on this particular XDEV footage that has always been circulated for a while now, and apparently it was Deviation's game. So I think as more time goes by, we might learn more about this title, given there is more material out there. All right, we've got some Sony financials. Their Q3 2024 report, which is broadly very good. So we did learn that Sony shipped 9.5 million PS5s for a total of 74.9 million now. So when we launch align that with PS4, that console was at 76.6 million in the same time frame. So it is still trailing behind globally, but in the US, PS5 is also still ahead 7% from PS4. Monthly active users also hit a brand new high, 129 million during Q3. and sales and operating income saw a big increase, 16 and 37% respectively year on year, due primarily to hardware sales, sales of non-first-party games and add-on content, and also a decrease in losses from hardware. Getting into the platform business group, we learned that 40% of PS5 sold during this quarter were new users, and PS Plus revenue is up 20% year on year directly because of the higher tiers and price revisions. For the Studios business group, Sony says that Helldivers 2 and Astro winning awards in their categories is a major stride in their portfolio, and these are genres that they're aiming to expand, so family-friendly and live service. And Sony also reiterates that Ghost of Yotei and Death Stranding 2 are releasing this year. So if there was any doubt, those games are still planned to ship within this calendar year. But yeah, the one headline that's coming up a lot here is how Sony wants to expand on family-friendly games, which it's funny because that was right next to the Helldivers 2 live service thing, so they want to expand in both categories, but of course one sounds a lot more interesting than the other. But that is true. They want to do more of it, which they never really left. I mean, they did downsize this, I would say, a lot compared to the PS2 or PS3 cycle. But, you know, we had Sackboy Big Adventure, we had Lego Horizon Adventures, of course, Astrobot. They never really left, per se, but it would still be great to have more of that stuff, obviously, especially because there is a treasure trove of more family-friendly IP that they can explore and bring back as well, so I'm all for that. But here's the thing about this report, right? The sales. What can we not do when we try to grade myself from our annual predictions? We can't accurately grade my sales predictions, but now we can, which I'll tell you folks, I thought like I wasn't doing that well from last year because I had guessed 75 million, but by the time we got to this year, it's like, oh, well, if you look at quarter by quarter, they're down further than I thought they would from the PS4 sales pace, which is kind of what I'm trying to benchmark the PS5 install base at. And so I was like, oh, so they're probably at like 73, 74 million, so I might not be that close. However, we have the real number, 74.9. I was almost dead on. That is awesome. But the thing is, like, yeah, this holiday season was insane for them. 9.5 million was nearly the peak for consoles they sold, which the Pro is helping a small chunk there. We still don't know exactly how many they sold. That's likely a 1 in 5 figure, but still a decent enough bump that gets them just that much further than I really thought they were going to do for this quarter. I'm like, there's no way they're going to sell 9+ million for this outgoing holiday season. But really, it was probably that sales promotion too. Let's be honest. I mean, you could get a PS5. It was like new $375. That was the lowest we ever saw, $75 off from MSRP here in the US. So yeah, those promotions did some heavy work this holiday season. So they're still behind PS4, but like these are actually really surprising numbers. I didn't think they would be as good as they are, which bodes very well for the position they're in when, say, Grand Theft Auto 6 does come out. I think we are in a very unique position of probably seeing a platform cycle that has an atypical decay curve where it goes back up in sales just off one game, which is absolutely an outlier. Moving on to another interview that gave us some insight into an older PlayStation IP and what could have been, because we actually had two of those this week. One we already talked about on Tuesday as a separate upload. That was the Ben Hansen MinMax interview speaking with Andrea Pacino, co-founder of Ready at Dawn. He was really spilling tea on what went wrong with the Order 1886, the sequel pitch, all that stuff. So we already discussed that. But in this case, we do have Ted Price, Insomniac Games president and CEO, retiring very soon, and he was speaking with Greg Miller of Kinda Funny, and Greg, of course, asked about Resistance 4, and so Ted did confirm that, yes, they did pitch the game. Now, he never said when it happened, which is really important here, but Ted did say that the pitch was a wonderful concept, just the timing and market opportunity didn't work out. The Insomniac team was really passionate about extending the story, and they spent a lot of time fleshing out the backstory, where the Chimera came from, and they know fans always wanted another game, so it was nice to hear that. I do want to know like when this happened, but I guess it really doesn't matter because I'm not sure there's like a good time to do it. The thing is, Resistance is always a franchise where it's like, one, it wasn't huge, and two, it really did decline every release, where we saw this from the Insomniac breach, but Resistance 1 sold 3.8 million, then 2 did 2.8 million, and then the third game did 1.7 million. So I'm not sure there's ever really a good time to pitch a fourth game. But the thing is, like, here's the thing, I really love Resistance. I think it's a great series, and it's like the one game where, like, I don't know why, but I find that it actually would do well nowadays. And I don't say that about every old PlayStation IP. I'm always of the mind where it's like, yes, I love all the old IP that Sony sits on, but like not all of it's coming back. One, that's just, it's impossible. They don't have the studio resources for that, or no industry resources for that. I mean, there's hundreds of IP they sit on. That's problem number one. Number two, not everything is viable. Number three, you know, even though I like certain things, I know maybe it just is not going to come back or it's dead. That's always kind of where I stand on it. But this is like one of the few IP that I'm like, I think this could come back. I mean, it's alternate history, sci-fi, it's a first-person shooter, it's got a single-player campaign, it's something that they don't do anymore at all. And so I find that if they were to reboot the franchise, I don't know, I genuinely feel like it's got a decent shot at maybe resonating with a much bigger audience nowadays versus back then. And really the mileage could be similar for a lot of PS3 games back then, but Resistance, I do find that maybe it would have a decent shot. And so it's one of those never say never things. I know Ted knows that all too well. So it doesn't matter, though, because he's going to be retiring. He's going to be a fan and sitting from behind the scenes. And he does hope that, like, yeah, maybe it could happen someday. And I'm right there with you, Ted. I hope so, too. Next up, we have some PlayStation Productions trailers. First being Until Dawn, new trailer there. Still looks like the initial pitch of what they're going for, which is more Until Dawn in name, but I still can appreciate the sort of idea of them trying to incorporate the game's dividing plot lines, but putting it into one path where the characters are waking up trying to avoid death in a different manner. I definitely will go see that. The other news is a teaser trailer for Season 2 of Twisted Metal. This is where the actual Twisted Metal tournament will take place with Calypso. So I didn't watch Season 1, but I'm sure a lot of folks will be interested in Season 2 based on the positive reception from the first season. And then we also have an HBO executive mentioning that they think it's likely that The Last of Us is going to be 4 seasons in total. They were speaking with Deadline, and so they didn't outright confirm this, but they said, oh, it's looking like, you know, the plan here might be 4 seasons. So basically what we heard from Craig Mazin prior. So it does seem like that second game, if we assume the next 3 seasons is going to cover just the second game, and they're not sort of waiting to like wait out time for like the third game, let's say, then probably it will be 3 more seasons for Season 2, which I'm not entirely opposed to if they are looking to finally spend more time on some of those big key moments in Part 2, because I still find that the first season was pretty quick. It felt quick. Now, I feel like I would be remiss to not mention this, but it was kind of a big deal, or at least a surprise, which was during the Super Bowl halftime show here in the U.S., we had Kendrick Lamar performing, and the stages were, there were 4 separate ones, and they were shaped as PlayStation buttons. And according to Wired, Kendrick wanted the symbols to be there to help portray his life as video games. That was the core idea behind that. Seems as though it was more something that they wanted to do and not necessarily Sony, especially because PlayStation, they're very particular as far as the arrangement of the buttons and how they would be seen. So I don't think that was like a Sony thing at all. It was just something their team wanted to put together, which Sony's not going to be really opposed to, I would have to gather, if that's how it played out. But yeah, that made a lot of headlines, was that Super Bowl halftime show, because it went viral, obviously. But the aerial shots, yeah, you can see the buttons based on the depends on the camera angle, but the arrangement might look weird or it might look right. So yeah, it was kind of out of nowhere. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and we had a lot going on. We did the PSN downtime discussion, we did the Order 1886 interview that really gave us some insight into what went down with that game, and then we had our State of Play reactions as always, so if you want to see the big moments or watch it with me, that video is up on the channel as well. And that is pretty much it, so not sure what we have coming up, but that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. So I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.